Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today on this masterclass looking at the end of lockdown. My name is Angela Turton. I'm Senior Partner with Action Coach. This masterclass is a latest in a series of weekly webinars and workshops we are running at the moment to help business owners through the crisis and beyond. So a little bit of housekeeping to start with. At the bottom of your screen, there should be a raise your hand button. If you could just raise your hand, if you can hear me. And if you can raise your hand again, if you can see my slides. There is a chat box and a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Hopefully you can all find that. So the Prime Minister's statement on Sunday was followed by some more detailed guidance that came out during the week. We have put links to both of those things on our website, but there's still a great deal of interpretation and leadership required by business owners to ensure that they get their staff and their customers back safely. There's a lot of unanswered questions. And of course, all of this is dependent on the COVID-19 virus behaving according to plan. We are really pleased today to have been able to gather 5 experts together to assist you in making the decisions that you need to make. We won't be able to give you all of the answers because we're still awaiting some guidance, but we will hopefully give you enough to be able to start on your plan. We encourage you to make lots of notes, type any questions or comments into the question box or the chat box. And at the end of each segment, we'll be I will be asking your questions of the experts. So first up, pleased to introduce Rupert Turton. Rupert is Senior Partner with Action Coach and his MD of Action Coach in Oakham. He has over 20 years experience of managing remote teams based across the globe. Rupert Turton.
Oh, great. Thank you. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Hopefully this will be a really informative afternoon. We've got a great team of experts lined up to talk to you. Let's just start with the fundamentals. So leadership is still leadership regardless of location. Doesn't matter where you are in the world. The fact we're working remotely just means leadership continues as it always has. It just has to be stronger and clearer than it has been historically. And as leaders, there's really 4 questions that we all ask ourselves when we're working with teams remotely. The first of those is, how do we know people are really working? The second is, are the people getting enough social interaction? Are our team getting enough social interaction with each other? Thirdly, are we getting good enough feedback from our team to be able to consider the options around the business and make informed decisions? And then finally, can we be as effective as when we were co-located, when we're working remotely? So actually, just as a quick show of hands, do you recognize any of those questions in yourself at the moment? If you just tap on the question box at the bottom of the screen to see who recognizes that in themselves. Okay. Oh, well. Not many of you, to be honest. Okay, that's fine. So let's move on. So as Angela said, my background has been in medium-sized businesses and the corporate world. And throughout my career, I've led numerous teams remotely. Often those team members are in different countries to each other as well. And actually, the other defining factor is I usually can't do the work that I'm asking my team to do. I definitely can't do IT design. I'm not a lawyer or an accountant, and I'm not an HR expert either. So I am very dependent on my ability as a leader to get the job done. So let's talk a little bit about the interpersonal dynamics of change. Do you want to move on a slide, Ange? So from a leadership perspective, it's still very important to be seen as the leader. Now, obviously, being visible to your team suffers immensely when we're working remotely, because simply you're in different locations. We're all working in our spare rooms, in our studies, in our kitchens at home, on the dining room table. So obviously we don't have that day-to-day interpersonal communication. And as a result, we lose a lot of the feedback we get in conversations. So you can't see somebody's facial expression, you can't see their body language, you don't get any of that non-verbal feedback. So as a result, you need to be very careful of the way that you're delivering messages, the way you're communicating with each other. Email and text are just so dangerous. If you've, I don't know, if I send an email to a text to somebody saying, have you completed the report? Because let's face it, typing anything in text is hard work. To some people, that's going to sound really aggressive. So you've got to be really careful about how you communicate back to your team. And then once you've sent the communication, you've also got to make sure that whoever you're sending to understands the message that you've sent them. So you need to start thinking about other ways to receive critical cues from your audience on a day-to-day basis. So let's just get a bit of interaction going here. Can you just type in the QA box any ideas you have for receiving critical, or ensuring that you receive critical cues from your team? Just type in the QA box down at the bottom of your screens any ideas you have for ways of getting those critical cues from your team when you communicate with them. So the first one we've got coming in is the use of using Zoom as a communication mechanism. That's obviously great, because you do actually then, with the video conferencing, start to get the face-to-face communication. Yeah, actually, video conferencing, Team and Zoom seem to be the common themes going on here. So in their book, The Long Distance Leader, Kevin Edkenberry and Wayne Tamel talk about the 3 gears of leadership. Ange, can you move on the slide, please? So the 3 gears of leadership. The first of those gears, and the biggest, is leadership and management. It's the behaviors that we as leaders are expected to exhibit when we are leading. The second of those gears, slightly smaller, is the tools and technology that we use. And be very sensitive about the tools and the technology choices that you're making, because there's a tendency to stick with the tools that you feel comfortable with, the technology that you're used to using, which may not necessarily be the best tool for the job. So if you've all been based in an office used to face-to-face communication, actually you're probably quite uncomfortable using video conferencing, Zoom and Teams technology. So you may be falling back to the telephone, which may not be appropriate for all types of communication. And also think very carefully about when you're using email in your communication as well. And then the third wheel, or third gear, is skills and impact. That's the skills that you have and the impact that you and your team are making to do the job, to do whatever service or delivery your business provides. So think about the tools that you're using with you, or in tools that your team are using. If historically your team have used Excel to do their budgets, maybe it's time to start thinking about using a tool that is more suited to remote working, such as Xero, to do your finances on. Or maybe you've got a paper-based customer management system. Maybe this is the time to move to a cloud-based system such as Salesforce or HubSpot, or maybe even think differently as a design company, maybe move your CAD systems to the cloud. Whatever is appropriate for you, but making sure that you're using the tools rather than appropriate for the skills that your team have to implement. And John will talk a little bit more about that later on in the presentation. Now, we were very lucky in Action Coach. Miles Downey, who is one of Europe's foremost business coaches, his business is coaching senior executives and leadership teams to develop their coaching skills. Miles Downey presented to the Action Coach coaches last Thursday evening, and he was talking about the enabling leader, which was where these 3 overlapping circles come from. So Miles talks about the why, the what, and the how of leading. So let me just run through those. I'll start in the middle with the what. So the what is describing to the people you're working with, to your team members, what you expect them to do. It's talking about what you're expecting them to deliver. It's talking about the quality. It's talking about the time that it's going to happen. It's making it something that, as a manager, you know they've completed. It's the description of what they're going to deliver. And it's also working out what the check-in points are going to be between you and that team member. Now, the how is the conversation that you have with the team member. It's how that team member is actually going to deliver the what. Got to be very careful when we do this as well. If you want your team members to be fully engaged and to fully buy into what you're asking them to do, you need to let them work out how they're going to deliver. So in effect, they are working out the solution. And there's a real tendency as a leader for us just to dive on in there and tell them how we would do it and expect them to do it in exactly the same way, which is not always the best way to get the job done. Particularly when you're working remotely, you need to work with these people. You need to help them figure out what the solution is going to look like. Now, having given them the autonomy to go off and work out how they're going to deliver, you've also got to put that in context. So when they make decisions, they understand what they're making context, what the decisions they're making, and how that affects the wider organization. So you need to also talk to them about the why. The why is the bigger context around what you're talking to them about. Is what the organization is looking to achieve, is what the project is looking to achieve. And if you like, you've now got a cascade down from the why, this is what the organization is trying to achieve, to the what, this is what we need you to achieve, and then the how, this is how we're going to achieve it. So in management terms, what we're talking about is, first of all, the why is what we do as leaders. That's the leadership. The what is the management. It's the day-to-day management of the business, the day-to-day allocation of activities to different team members. And the how, that's coaching. That's working with the team members to help them develop the skills to be able to do the task in hand. And all of this then has to exist within a relationship within the organization, a trusting relationship where you're happy to support each other and they trust you to do the best for them. So fundamentally, we've got three outcomes that we're looking to achieve. We've got the organizational outcome. And next slide, please. We've got the organizational outcome, which is what the organization is looking to achieve. We've got the team outcome, what the individual team is looking to achieve, and the personal outcome. So I think the organizational outcome speaks for itself. It's in terms of what the business is looking to do, and obviously that's going to be aligned to your business vision and your business goals. The team outcome is how that particular team then fits into the overall organization. So what specifically are they doing that helps the overall delivery for the organization? It helps people to understand how the work they are doing fits into the bigger company. And then the final one, the individual outcomes. That's what you expect from the individual team members. So it's setting their goals, it's setting your expectations for what you want them to achieve. But conversely, it's also got to consider what they are looking to get out of coming to work. Because let's face it, people come to work to support things they're doing in their wider life. So it's also, you've got to consider what their greater expectations are of work, what the goals they're looking to achieve are. And establish the rules of working together and how to get support. Work with them to understand that, the rules of engagement. So maybe sit down with them and just the little basics about how often you're going to check in with each other, how often you're going to have a one-to-one phone call, the rules about maybe before you phone somebody, maybe you need to agree as a group that it's appropriate that you just text them first. Think about how you're going to all work together. And remember that working remotely can be very much like living on an island. There's less interaction between the team members, and less sense of belonging. So you sort of have to artificially create that interaction. And so if you're not careful, it becomes very easy for team members to lose sight of the bigger picture and their role in it. So think of how you're going to handle that. And the other thing, of course, is about when you start to think about the outcomes you're looking to achieve, when you start setting goals for the organization, Yeah, you've also got to make sure, having set those goals, you actually achieve them. So historically, when I went in to fix a project, after a couple of days of talking to the team and getting to know them, we'd all sit down, go into a meeting, and we would agree what each team member was going to do with it within the project, and set the goals, set the SMART goals for them, so they know what they're going to achieve. And I would also make it very clear that I wasn't going to accept a missed goal. And then at the first check-in point, if they'd missed the goal, I'd also make it very clear that I wouldn't accept missed deadlines. And on numerous occasions, I've had teams working through the night to complete a goal that they missed. And inevitably, it usually came down to one or two people who had failed to deliver, which then puts enormous social pressure on them to make sure they hit their goals next time. So you start to get the whole team working together. And what I realized over time was, actually, when you went in to fix a broken project, a lot of it was that the team had just got out of the habit of achieving their goals. So let's talk a little bit about communication. So you've probably all heard of the golden rule, treat others as you would like to be treated yourself. I'd like to upgrade that actually to the platinum rule. Treat others as they would like to be treated. Think very much about the way that an individual wants to be communicated with, the way they want to be interacted with, the way they want to be managed. So lead others in the way that works best for them. And those of you who saw my Facebook Live this morning, I was talking about an assessment tool called DISC that we use inside Action Coach. There's similar tools, others you've probably heard of, Myers-Briggs, Insight, Strength Finder out there. But the whole point of using an assessment tool to understand the personalities of your different teams is to understand how they tick, what makes them operate, and the best way to treat them. But it also allows you to see how your team are likely to work together. And actually, conversely, it also allows you to see where the sources of challenge might be in that behavior as well. And then ask people how they want to work with you as well. So using neutral questions, just ask them what can you do to help them be successful, and then just shut up and wait to see what they say. Maybe ask them, tell them you want to support them, and how do you help them stay on track? Or ask them, how often would you like us to have a one-to-one? Have the conversation with them, ask the question, and then wait to see what their response is. And then don't forget, you've got to respond to whatever they do. Actually start to implement whatever they have suggested as the best way for you to work together. Now, with all of this, we also need to have a little look at trust within the working relationship as well. So there's really three components necessary for high levels of trust to exist. The first one is common purpose, the second is competence, and the third is motive. So first of all, let's just start with common purpose. Do you and your team all have the same common purpose in the work that you are doing? I can guarantee if you talk to most teams, although they'll say they have a common purpose, when you actually ask each of them what that is, you'll find that their interpretation differs person to person. So you do need to make sure that actually that common purpose is really a common purpose and common understanding of what your organization and what your teams are trying to achieve. The second is, do you believe that you and your team are competent to do the work that's required and to deliver that common purpose? And the third is the motives. What are your team's motives motivations to do the job? Are they willing, and are you willing to go the extra mile? The more alignment we've got of these three components, the more trust that's going to exist in the organization. So maybe one of the things to try is when you're in a team meeting, try showcasing one person per meeting. Get them to stand up and talk about the work that they're doing or a project that they're involved in. Share some praise in public. If somebody's doing a great job, praise them in public, make sure everybody knows, and also delegate in public as well. But when you delegate, make sure that you reflect fairness in the way that you're delegating activities to your team members. I mean, I think the bottom line is you have to lead from the front. So that's pretty much it for everything I was going to talk to you about this morning. In summary, I think don't forget, leadership is still leadership, even though we're working remotely. Don't forget, use the technology as a tool to enable you to do your job. And John will talk a bit about the technologies later on in the presentation. And when you're leading, really think hard about the why, the bigger context of what you're trying to achieve, the what and the specifics of what individuals are meant to be doing, and the how. Work with them to understand. Take it from terms of leadership into management, and then down to coaching with the individuals. Hope that was helpful to you. Angela, I guess it's over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. So a little bit of a whistle-stop tour of leadership. It's obviously a huge subject. So if anybody does want to explore more how to make yourself a better leader, then get in touch with Rupert. I've had a couple of questions coming in, Rupert. I've got the first one is, my team never finish anything on time. What can I do?
Oh, yeah. So the first thing I'd say is go back to what I was saying a few moments ago. Be very clear about what you're asking the team to do. Make sure it's agreed with them. A lot of the time you find when team members aren't doing what the leader expects them to do, the manager expects them to do, it comes down to poor communication. So make the effort to really sit down, make sure they understand what they need to do. And don't forget, different people communicate in different ways. Some people, you can give them very brief instructions and they'll do the job perfectly. Other people, you'll have to invest time with them to explain exactly what needs to be done and build up their knowledge, build up their skills. There's going to be two levels here. There's going to be building up their skills to enable them to do the job, but there's also going to be the element of motivating them as well. So encouraging them, supporting them so they feel able to do that job. And then break the task down into smaller components. If you're having trouble getting people to do a bigger task, I would suggest you break it down into smaller chunks. Think about it. When you're standing at the bottom of a cliff, the way I always describe it, you're standing at the bottom of a cliff looking up, wondering how you're going to climb to the top. And initially it looks impossible and you just sort of freeze, don't know what to do next. And then over time, you start to realize where the various handholds are, where the various footholds are, and you start to work a route up the cliff that you can follow, maybe the ledge here to have a rest, and just a little rock you could balance on a little bit further up, and you figure out how you're going to get to the bottom, to the top, in smaller stages. And it's exactly the same when you're asking somebody to do something. If the task you're asking is too big or too far out, they just don't start. You need to break it down into smaller chunks with them, so they've got something to aim for.
Great, thank you. I guess this is one for John. What technology shall I be using? Shall we bat that over to John when he does his?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, the only thing, it comes back to what I was saying about the 3 gears. You need to think about what the organization is trying to achieve. You need to think about the skills that the team bring, and you then need to think about the most appropriate technology to allow them to achieve that. So it's not a completely black and white question, I'm afraid.
Okay, and the last question, which I guess Mary will have an input into, is what do I do if I have one person not pulling their weight?
Yeah, I guess it depends why they're not pulling their weight. Actually, I would go back to the way that you delegate the work to them in the first place. Have you sat down, explained what's expected? Have you, as a team, got rules of the game that sort of common culture that you all work to? I mean, it could be as simple as, people, I don't know what's a bad example, I suppose, is somebody makes a cup of coffee. Just, the rules that you have agreed to as a team are that if you make yourself a cup of coffee, you tidy up the mess in the coffee area straight afterwards. It might be as simple as if the phone rings, you take it in turns to answer the phone, and it's always answered in 3 rings. It's just making sure that you've explained to everybody, that individual as well, what's exactly expected from them. And if that doesn't work, I suppose you need to look around a little bit and just see what's really going wrong as well. My fundamental belief is that people come to work to do a good job. So if they're not doing a good job, don't just assume immediately they don't want to. Let's work with them and support them and get them to a place where they can. And actually, again, it comes back to, even as I'm saying that, it comes back to me to mention it. I mean, there's 2 elements to this. There's the skills to do the job, which we can attain through coaching and mentoring and working with them. And there's the motivation to do the job, which partially is going to involve us supporting that individual and working with them to motivate them, get them to the point they're comfortable to do the job as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Rupert. Fantastic. As I said, if anybody does want to explore this topic further, then please give Rupert a ring, and all his contact details I shall pop in to the chat box in a little bit. Hold on, I've lost control. Let me just... So next up we have Kate. Kate is a chartered accountant based in Kettering. She has over 25 years experience of accounts and accounting. She is very down to earth, but she's incredibly well informed, efficient and focused. She's a really friendly person, and she's able to explain some quite complex details that we have at the moment very simply. The government has given us a lot of help, and but finance really is one of the key areas that we need to look at as we go back to work. Ladies and gentlemen, Kate. I'll unmute you, Kate.
Thank you very much for inviting me along today. Right, now there are several factors that we need to consider from a financial perspective as we come out of lockdown, and it would be foolish to try and do these without a plan. Now, cash flow is the first one. But for a start, you need to ascertain what sort of market there is for your business as lockdown ends. This will vary from industry to industry, but hopefully you will have a good idea of how desperate people are for your products or services. For example, if you own a hair salon, then the chances are that you will have people queuing up for an appointment. But then again, maybe now that some people have gone through the pain of growing their badger stripe out, maybe they'll decide that they actually don't need to spend their hard-earned cash colouring their hair, and that they'll just go grey gracefully, or that they actually like their new lockdown hairstyle. The next factor to consider is your supply chain. For example, if you can't get the raw materials that you need to start production, then you're not exactly going to go full bore from the off. You might need to consider alternative supplies or a more phased return to normality. Keeping with my hair salon example, you might have to allow a gap between appointments so that two customers aren't in the salon at the same time, and that you have time to disinfect the chairs in between, or that only one hairdresser is allowed to operate at any one time to reduce the risk of spread. This should then determine your staffing structure. If you've got staff already furloughed, then you need to consider your timetable for getting them back into work, including prioritising some roles. And I know Mary will be talking more about this later. As soon as an employee starts to work again, they have to be taken off furlough. You can't take them off part-time. It is all or nothing. I know there are moves afoot to change this in the next phase, but at the moment, that is how it is. So you might decide it's more cost-effective to take some members back to work and leave some on furlough until business ramps up enough to take them all back. At the current time, the furlough scheme is due to finish at the end of October, so you do have the flexibility of leaving some on furlough for the time being. And also bear in mind that any furlough claims have to be a minimum of 3 weeks. So if you've had someone who, for example, during April, you've still been employing to chase debtors or do some admin work, and they've been using up some of their holiday, so they haven't actually been furloughed since the 1st of May, and then you're planning on going back to work on Monday, you won't have the 3-week claim, so you'll have to fund that yourself. You also need to be aware that you are likely to incur additional costs as a direct result of COVID. At the very least, you are likely to have to supply hand sanitizer and PPE for staff. You may also need to increase the number of times you get your premises cleaned too. I know Lucy will go into more detail on what is required from a health and safety perspective. These 3 factors should form the basis for a cash flow forecast. And I can't stress highly enough how important it is that you need to do this. Without cash, you will cease to exist. Once you've got your cash flow forecast, you can ascertain what funds you need to maintain your working capital. It is a good idea to flex your cash flow forecast so that you have a best case scenario and a worst case scenario. That way you can be prepared for both extremes to either maximise your potential or to create contingency plans so that you can continue to weather the storm. This will form the basis for you to identify how much working capital you will need. There are various schemes out there to assist you if you've got a shortfall, but this is also a very good opportunity to review your costs and overheads to find out if you can make any longer term cuts, and this can provide scope for greater profits in the future. Also, don't forget, in this world of new normal, you may have to revisit your KPIs and basically rip up your previous targets and start again. Let's face it, you certainly won't be able to meaningfully compare April 2020 with April 2019. Next slide, please. Right, there are several government schemes available, including the Job Retention Scheme, Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan, Business Bounce Back Loan, and Self-Employed Income Support Scheme, and I'll go through these in more detail. The Job Retention Scheme allows you to claim up to 80% of your staff's normal pay if you have had to furlough them. Note that they cannot do any work for you during this period. So far, the portal for this does seem to be working well, and the rebates do seem to be arriving within their target 6 working days. The Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan is a government-backed bank loan available through the British Business Bank and is interest-free for the first year. Unfortunately, I am aware that several people have experienced quite a lot of difficulty in actually getting one of these loans. The Bounce Back Loan is designed for smaller and medium-sized businesses and appears to be easier to actually get. This is a loan for between £2,000 and 25% of your turnover, up to a maximum of £50,000. No repayments are due for the first year, and there's no interest for the first year either. It is 100% government backed and is repayable within 6 years. Coronavirus Statutory Sick Pay Rebate Scheme is also available to cover any sick pay paid to staff who are off ill due to coronavirus, whether it is them actually being ill or whether they've had to self-isolate because of a family member. However, there is still no guidance on how to recover this, and HMRC will keep us informed. The Self-Employed Income Support Scheme is obviously for self-employed businesses. You have to have submitted a self-assessment return for 2018-19 to qualify for this and have profits of less than 50,000. The portal to register for this was open from the 13th of May and is on a phased basis. HMRC will give you the calculation based on the previous 3 years trading up to the 2018-19 tax year. And I have to say, so far, they do appear to be spot on, agreeing with what I've calculated for my clients anyhow. Again, they have said that this will be paid within 6 working days. Next slide, please. Right. Additionally, any VAT payments due before the end of June, i.e. for those quarters ended the 29th of February, 31st of March and 30th of April, can be deferred until March 21. And the July payment on account for self-assessment is now not due until January 21. Do note that these are just a deferral of a tax, not a reduction in it. So you might want to consider making some payments if cash flow permits, to avoid having a very high January 21 self-assessment bill, followed by a very high March 21 VAT bill. HMRC have also said they will enter into time to pay agreements for other taxes to assist with cash flow, and I know several of my clients have satisfactorily entered into these agreements with HMRC. Additionally, if your business is in the retail, leisure, hospitality or nursery industries, then you could be eligible for a year's rate relief too. This will depend on the rateable value of your property. And hopefully all of you who are entitled to the 10 grand grant for businesses with small business rates relief have actually had your money now as there seemed to be a rather large disparity between local authorities as to how easy and how quickly these funds were available. I hope that gives a good summary of the position as it is, and let me know if you have any questions. Angela, are there any on the...
So thank you very much, Kate. That was fantastic. I've got a couple of questions come in. The first is, what if I think my self-assessment calculation is wrong?
Well, they have said that there is a right to appeal of it, and they are giving a breakdown of how they have calculated that. I would suggest that you speak to your accountant about that, because they have indicated that your accountant will be able to argue that on your behalf, but as yet I have yet to see any evidence of actually how you do that.
Well, I guess if you've agreed with everything so far, then hopefully there won't be too many that are in dispute. The second question is probably a little bit more technical. How does statutory sick pay work? Is it different under COVID-19?
Yes, it is. The normal statutory sick pay that you pay to your employees, you obviously don't get that back anymore. That's why the employer's allowance was introduced several years ago. Whereas because the coronavirus one, they appreciate, especially because of the fact that you have to perhaps be off for the full 2 weeks, even if it turns out you didn't have it. As a precaution, they have said that they will refund that SSP, and it's also payable from day 1, not from day 3, as normal SSP is. Again, they haven't actually said how you can get that rebate back yet, but I guess they've been a bit tied up with the job retention grant and the self-employed income support scheme at the moment, so I dare say that will be next.
Okay, so we haven't got a deadline yet for knowing that. No. Okay. And what is happening with furlough after June? Does the employee have to pay something up for the second part of furlough?
They haven't. They've sort of only indicated things at the moment. There's no firm guidance on this. They have implied that between the June and October that they will be reducing the rate of furlough, but allowing people to come back on a part-time basis so that it's not a big cliff edge.
Great. And the last one, I think, is, I'm not sure if this is for you or Mary, but can people on furlough also be on holiday?
As far as I'm aware, yes. But again, Mary will probably be the best one to just, I think it'll perhaps depend on your contract. I don't know. Ask Mary.
Ask Mary. Wonderful. And with that in mind, we are now going to hand over to Mary. So Mary is a qualified workplace mediator and a MCIPD accredited employment expert with over 25 years of experience working in public and private sector HR management. She provides strategic and practical HR advice and support. And her specialisms include workplace mediation, change management, employment engagement, HR projects such as 2P transfers, and a lot of other complicated casework. So Mary, over to you.
Thank you everybody. Good afternoon everyone, and just before I start, in terms of the question for Kate just now, yes, the answer is yes, you can agree for people to take leave while they're on furlough. So good afternoon everybody, so thanks for taking the time to participate. I've been asked to talk to you about getting back to work in relation to your in relation to your employee plans and the considerations around your legal responsibilities around this. Okay, I'm hoping that I'll be able to give you a few things that you're able to take away with you today that's useful. So to start with, I'd like to give you an overview of what I'm going to talk about in this slot. Next slide, please, Angela. And again. Okay, so first of all, we're going to talk about your workforce plan, and you'll note that I've got up there stage 1 and then further down stage 2. I'm calling this stage 1 as we're just going to look specifically at what you're needing right now to get your teams back to work if they're not already started to go back. And obviously, with reference to people plans and this ever-changing situation, it's likely that there are going to be different plans at a later stage that you'll need to review as well. We'll also talk about compliance, and I'm sure you're hearing this word lots at the moment. Here I'm talking about the legal compliance in terms of your responsibilities as an employer with employees. So where you have changes to terms and conditions, obviously Rupert talked about leadership. And are probably seeking ideas from employees about how they might go about things that are changing, which is great. But ultimately, as well as that, you have to be mindful of your contractual obligations to your employees. So there are processes that you need to comply with. And we'll talk about a little bit about test and measure. So when you're going through this process, what's worked well and what maybe needs tweaking or changing completely before you go on to stage 4, looking at your workforce transformation or recovery plan. Okay, by this point, we would hope that you'd be clearer about what your business is looking like and how it's changing shape with all of this situation going on and what it might look like in the future. Next slide, please, Angela. Okay, so the workforce plan stage 1. So following on from what Rupert was saying and the useful things that Rupert went through about, perhaps not having an absolute clear plan around or clear idea, a fixed idea around what you're going to do without having some input from your employees. I completely support that. But before you also do anything, you need to plan in your own mind what impact this has all had on your business and what say for the next 3 months looks like. So where your employees are concerned, how does it impact them? So you need to be clear about what your plans are, even if there is an outline and there's a footprint for you to probably seek input from employees around that. That's important as well. But if you're not clear about your plans, you could start going down one road where employees are concerned to then have to come back and go down another road. And at a time where everybody's feeling quite uneasy about the situation, that's probably not too helpful when you're dealing with employees. So what kind of impact are the changes of going back to work at this stage of your business likely to have on your employees? Will you need them to work differently? Do you have any work for them to carry out right now? Because it might be a staggered process. So, or are you going to be needing them to really do the things that they might have been doing before, but allow for some extra things to be put in place? So that's very much around, if I give you an example, a health and safety point of view, they might not just be able to hop on some tills if they work in a retail environment, because there might be some extra things that you need them to follow through with. So they might have to work differently, and you might need them to change their working arrangements. And more importantly as well to them understanding why that's necessary. So if we take a pub restaurant chain, for example, I know Kate used hairdressers, so let's give you a different example. But if we take a pub restaurant chain, a small one, we know that they can't currently open, not in full anyway. That business might decide that they have the scope to open part of their business. Many pub restaurants are opening a business for takeaway, whether that be people turning up and taking away food or delivery. So different meal options if there's a demand there. So if you choose to go down that route, you'll very quickly have to identify if we just call them critical functions, in order to deliver that business objective. And obviously that therefore knocks on to identifying your key roles. So you've identified your critical functions, that leads you to identify your key roles. So whether it's you're looking at your cooking, your kitchen teams, or whether there's specialists involved, depending on what type of restaurant and food you offer. Once this is identified and you identify the roles, then you're in a discussion where you can map this out further. You will also know that perhaps, in your restaurant, in your pub, you had bar staff, you had waiting staff. It might be that you can repurpose these roles a little bit so you can allow them to come back to work, but perhaps in a bit of a different format. If this is the case, then obviously that's different to the terms and conditions that you employed them on, but it might be that you need this as a temporary change in order to continue your business running. So with that in mind, as Rupert was saying before, talk to your employees and see what arrangements you can come to in relation to these changes, or longer term and even short term. Sometimes you might need to go into formal consultation, but certainly if you're able to reach agreement, if there are quite minor changes, then this is something that should be done relatively easily. Okay. Another example is in the press recently is a gin company that I'd come across. They stopped making gin because there was a reduction, obviously, with all the pubs being shut, etc. They weren't needing to make as much gin, so they've repurposed their business to start making hand sanitizer. Because the demand from gin had dropped off. And I can't say that that's happened in this household, but I can't speak for you guys, but certainly some hand sanitizers in high demand. So they're utilising and changing their business to reopen to produce something else, utilising their employees to do that. For some businesses, that might be easier than other businesses. Let's just hope they're not trying to taste the sanitizer. But back to the pub example, it might be that the business might end up with some staff remaining on furlough, if they've got any staff on furlough at the moment, some needing to return. They might need to look at staggered working, shift patterns, those sort of things. And with that in mind, that can only be achieved by talking through with your team how that would look. And therefore, it is important that you're planning before you go down deeper into those routes of what that might look like. That will lead you to be clear on what it is you're needing to do. And then at that point, you're able to explain to your teams how it impacts them, at least in the short term. Clearer of you're clearer to them on what's expected and when this is likely to happen. So you know what it's like at the moment. Everything's been unclear in terms of timings, how far ahead you can plan and that sort of thing. And then what you'll need to put in place to allow a return. In other words, what are your critical functions that you require to get you up and running from a people perspective? Next slide, please, Angela. Okay, Rupert talked ever such a lot about leadership, and from a HR perspective, when working with clients, I come across this every day, and it's always, is it about brilliant leadership in this scenario when people are going through lots of change, or is it about brilliant management, or could it be both? And obviously it is both, but in order to be able to manage effectively, you need to have really effective leadership. Your teams will be looking to you and your managers to lead them through this time. They'll be looking for confidence from you, and trust that you're clear about what is happening and when, and what your decisions have been based on, and that you have given them an opportunity to be involved in that decision making if it is indeed that it affects them and the work that they carry out with your business. Your company value and culture here are key. So nobody's been through this before. This is all new for all of us, as we all know. So it requires, for some more than others, a complete mindset change. Employees will be feeling uncertain. Some might be nervous, some are even scared. Other employees will be bursting at the seams to get back, whilst you might face situations where if people have been working from home, they might actually quite like that and want to make that a longer term arrangement. You might just be faced with staff that have been particularly resistant. They might struggle a little bit more with the whole process of going through change. So to encourage trust and flexibility from the teams, you need to make sure that your managers and yourselves are open and flexible to employees working differently. Obviously, you will hope that they would be as well. But also you need to be mindful of what their personal circumstances are at this time. So operating in several shades of grey is important, because it's the grey that allows a flexible approach. Businesses that stick strictly to black and white approach will find that they're not perhaps able to operate as flexibly as they might like. So, you know, just like you expect your workforce to be flexible to meet the needs of your business, it's important at this time that businesses are also doing the same, and therefore live in the culture and values that hopefully they commit to through their business. And yes, of course, you'll need to operate within a framework because you have your policies and procedures. But remember that at the point those policies and procedures, those HR policies and procedures were written, it's probably not to deal with this situation in mind. So effective management is key here, that you pull on those policies and you're ensuring consistency where it's needed in following due process. But there's you use these as a framework rather than a Bible, because by doing so you'll get the best flexibility from your team, and along the way you would expect to have less issues. If we move to the next slide, please, Angela. Which takes us on to maximum effort at this time. So maximum effort, what we mean by that is by everybody. So it's employees and employers. We all know, like Rupert mentioned, about how we like to be treated. And it's about understanding what makes your team tick. So, you know, what is important to them, and measuring it. Obviously, we would say, the saying is, oh, I'd like to be treated, you know, treat me as you'd want to be treated, and that sort of thing. So we know that if someone listens, considers what we're saying, and is willing to take on ideas, try new things, then we're more likely to be engaged with those employers within the workplace and want to go that extra bit further for them and be flexible back. That's what you would hope. And so for most people, that's what you would get. Therefore, if employers are inflexible with their employees, your business, you're able to move more successfully forward with going back to work at this time. A lot of businesses might focus on making their decisions based on, I'm not sure that would work because I've got one or two individuals in the team who are particularly difficult. And I would urge you not to base your business decision on one or two difficult people, because hopefully for every one or two, you've got several others who are more than willing to be flexible. And there are other ways that you can deal with those that are more resistant. Okay, anxiety is another area that's going to be really key for people. You were hearing it in the media already about how people are feeling. It's probably the top of every employer's list to try and put things in place to manage that and support people coming back to work. And that's really critical, because people's mental health and well-being at the moment is something that's been really focused on and is important. And employers have lots of responsibility around, by not following and actioning and supporting in the workplace could bring unnecessary risk and cost to the business. Most of the things that people will want to know about and reassurance about in terms of employees returning to work will be surrounded around the safe and healthy workplace and spaces that you're going to provide, and how that might be different to how it was before, what measures you're putting in. So yes, they do want to be clear before they return to work, not leave it until day one, about what you're putting in place around social distancing, who they'll be working with. Will PPE be needed? In most cases it will be, and what will that look like? What do they do if they don't come to work? Who will support them? There's going to be a hell of a lot of HR questions that are already coming up, and indeed a lot of them will surround what is it going to be like practically when I go into the workforce. Who will deal with that difficult customer if they're not keeping to the rules, or in my colleagues if they're not keeping to social distancing measures? And Lucy will talk a lot further about that under the health and safety section of this masterclass. But you will need to be clear about employees' rights around all of these questions. So pull on HR expertise to go through each case, because each case will be different, The other thing that I will be doing, or I've supplied Angela with, is a reference or a link that you can click on that takes you through to ACAS. ACAS have put on an awful lot of support on their website in terms of returning to work and answering lots of questions and answers that each employer is bound to be having around this time. Way too many for me to possibly cover in this slot. Okay, if we can move on to the next slide, please, Angela. Okay, communication. So throughout this masterclass so far, I think we've heard the word communication a hell of a lot. So it is about talking to your teams sooner rather than later. And hopefully you're all doing that now. And it's about going back continually with updated information, because you're not going to have all the answers all at once. And also, as Rupert was saying before, there might be things that you want to get their input into, things that you haven't considered. Zoom, phone calls, emails, two-way process. Ask them how they're feeling. Not everyone is as really resilient as others. Some employees may want to talk to you privately. It might be that they've got personal matters going on with them or their family. Remember, your employees, if they're covered by a protected characteristic, may need additional support from you in the form of reasonable adjustments. As this is a changing situation, don't stop with one briefing. So keep updating, listening to the feedback. Rupert talked about thinking about your approach and check their understanding. So being specific is really quite important, because how one employee might interpret what you're saying could be different to another. And soon, very much into this process, you'll start to discover what things you can just talk and communicate with your team, and what might make more fundamental changes that you may, even if it's temporary changes, have a responsibility to consult about. Okay, so the sort of things that you could be looking at in terms of queries is keeping people on furlough, lifting furlough. So you will be aware that, well, I hope you are aware that when you were putting people on furlough, if you're in that situation, you needed to put into writing with them the arrangements of that furlough on an individual basis. And that was required for if there's going to be audits and that sort of thing. Just like similarly, if you're going to lift furlough, you need to also make sure you put that in writing to them and what the arrangements are around that. If you're rotating groups of people, it might be that you lift furlough for some groups, and you say, right, okay, I'm going to have 3-week periods where I have different groups of people in, people that might do similar or the same jobs. That might have some health and safety implications. Obviously, Lucy would be the person that could confirm that, but it also could be an effective way to manage your workforce in the form of health and well-being with people that are struggling to be at home rather than being at work. You might look at staggering and changing contractual working times, shifts, and even down to if you've got a number of sites, you might even need to rotate some staff to work on sites if it is that you've got high levels of people that are still needing to be on furlough, childcare commitments, or working at home. Whatever twists and turns, it's important to follow up in writing. So yes, if you're consulting and it's something that's a temporary or might go into longer term change, you would need to consult. But if it's other operational things that are minor tweaks, then via emails, notice, newsletter, whatever you do try to make sure that you keep your records, and you also confirm in writing for if you're ever challenged at a later stage, you can demonstrate that you have communicated and consulted. And possibly serve notice depending on how fundamental the change is. Next slide, please, Angela. So if we talk about compliance here, so what we're talking about here, as a result, watch out for the following. So you're going through lots of business change at the moment, and likely to certainly for the next 12 months at least, from what the media are telling us and what the government are telling us. So with the level of change you're embarking on, you're bound to see increases in all these things that I've listed here. So if I take one, for example, grievances. So if your teams aren't feeling satisfied that you're managing the social distancing in the workplace, then you might find that you've got increased grievances. Similarly, if you're lifting furlough and you decide that you're going to lift it for, say, Rupert and Angela, sorry, I hope you're okay, guys, me using you two as an example, but Angela is going to remain on furlough because an assumption's made that she's got childcare commitments, for example, then you might find you've got some equality issues there and discrimination claims. So there are a number of things. You might have a surge in business. We look at Tesco, who couldn't recruit enough people for the period that they were going through around home deliveries, etc. So the circumstances could all be very different, but it's quite likely that many of these things might be triggered, and therefore it's essential that you make sure your managers and yourselves are in tune with what you commit to and what your employment legal expectations are, and following through with due process on these things. Okay. So make sure your managers are up to date on these policies. If you don't have policies in place, then I would suggest you refer to ACAS. Again, lots of useful tools there if it is that you don't have your a HR representative. Absence management is likely to be a massive area, particularly when schools are still off. It might be that one of your employees has a disability and they're concerned about coming back to work, or somebody's recently suffered a bereavement and they feel they can't cope. So if you have support schemes in place, occupational health support, then please make sure that you pull on those resources. The list could be endless and I could go on forever, so I'm not going to, because Angela will be telling me off soon, so I'm going to move on. Just to say to you on this, just to finish off that slide, is if you get things wrong in terms of lacking of following due process, then it could be a cost to your business at a time where you're needing to focus on the recovery of your business, not least the amount of management time it would take up. So testing and measuring, if you could just hit that again, Angela. Yeah, that's brilliant, thank you. It's, we've talked about team meetings. What's working when you first start communicating with your team upon embarking on this next period of change is what do you need to tweak, what's working, what's not. How are your teams feeling? It might be that you set up small focus groups, depending on the size of your business, of course. And also what needs to be refreshed. Do they need to go through additional training? What are the outputs? What are their objectives? And really don't lose sight of measuring through this period of time of going back into work. What efficiencies have you identified? Because that will lead into your the next slide on your workforce plan. So Angela, if you can have the next slide, please. So now you've returned in some way. Good old Boris has lifted further things, and life as we used to know it might not be the same, but we're able to, the horizon is clear, let's put it in terms of that. So you have a clearer idea of your business direction now, and this is the time when you can look more closely to the longer term and therefore the shape of your workforce as you want to take it forward. What has been your learning around this time? It's only then that you can firm up what the new norm might look like for your business. If we look at Chewy, for example, sometimes depending on what your business, what sort of environment you're in, Chewy this week have announced that they're making 8,000 redundancies. It's probably easier in some ways in the travel industry to see how longer term this is going to be for them, and it might not be as clear for other industries, but for them 8,000 redundancies, they're going to be embarking obviously on a process of redundancies and reorganisations. So it's really important that if you've got sight of the fact that that might be happening, or you're having to completely restructure your business, that you pull on HR support early on. Can't emphasise that enough, to make sure that you're on the right side of the law. And some might say, well, is that a cost that's necessary? But I would argue that actually it's probably more costly not to do that because of the the knock-on effects you might have around potential tribunal claims if you don't follow due legal process around those things. Okay, slide 10. Next slide, please, Angela. So remember, it's all about what you want your approach to be in terms of getting the best out of your workforce. We've never been in this situation before, so you need to have a clear expectation and keep in regular communication with your teams around what that might look like, remembering that they may feel daunted at times. Finally, don't forget to pull on the expertise, even if it's just to give you reassurance that you're on the right track. So don't keep your employees in the dark, whatever you do. If you're not clear about the direction, then they certainly won't be clear. And I think that takes me to the end of my presentation. So we just left by talking about cost and risk. And so there's nobody better for me to hand over to than Lucy Walsh to take you through your HR, that's me, sorry, your health and safety responsibility. Thank you for listening.
Okay, Mary, but before you disappear on us, I have got a question. Actually, got a couple of questions for you that have come in. So the first one, I'm going to read this out. We may need to ask the skeleton team to change their roles longer term. If the employee disagrees to the additional changes being suggested, that we are suggesting, do we then manage that as a redundancy situation?
So if redundancy is a really complex thing, if you've got a reduction
short answer, Mary, please.
Right, okay, sorry. That's a whole process in itself, but effectively it's about looking at what you can do to prevent redundancy. So you might need to reduce your workforce, but there are a number of things you might be able to do before you reach that point. And ultimately, if you're removing roles and people, say for example, you need people to work part-time and they're employed full-time, then actually it might qualify for redundancy. Devil's in the detail.
Okay. And do we have to wait until staff are off furlough before we can formally consult for a redundancy situation, or can we do it while they're on furlough?
No, you can do it while they're on furlough.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, if anybody has any other questions for Mary, suggest that we pick those up later and that we move on. And I'm going to introduce Lucy. Lucy Walsh is a health and safety, quality and environmental professional. She has over 20 years experience of implementing systems, gaining accreditations, auditing and providing solutions to manage risks. Lucy has worked in the construction industry, in warehouse distribution, electrical, mechanical engineering, food manufacturing and large global organizations. Crystal Clear Compliance is a dynamic consultancy providing solutions to assist companies in meeting their legislative demands and requirements. This is a huge, huge area that we need to look at as we're going back to work. So I hand you over to Lucy. I think I just unmuted you and then muted
Thank you, Angela.
Lucy.
Can you hear me okay?
I can, thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for having me on this panel, and I'm hoping that we're all providing some really great advice and information to those of you that are listening this afternoon. Okay, if I can have the next slide, please, Angela. And again, please. Thank you. Okay, so this afternoon, this is just a quick slide to tell you some of the areas I'm going to cover for you. As Angela has already said, I seem to have quite a big area of subject. Health and safety is huge and comes in many forms, so please bear with me. I've chosen just some key points here that I think you might be needing to look at. So we've got health and safety law and your obligations. So this will be not really changing much at the moment because of COVID. It should still be the same. The law will still be the same. So this is just really a bit of a reminder. And then we're looking at what is required under these laws and regulations. So, you know, that's just covering and making sure you've got the right things in place. the planning and the what needs to be considered next. Next, please, Angela. Risk assessments, that seem to be a big word at the moment, and a lot of people are talking about them. As a business, these should, and I hope, are already in place. So this is just simply about looking at them again and what measures you will need to put in place, the changes that you are going to have to adopt to get your staff back to work. Some suggestions and ideas. I've pulled a slide together here, and I'm going to share with you some suggestions of things that you may need to look at as part of this risk assessment process, and some ideas for some solutions that you may wish to consider. Then a short summary and some questions and answers. So if we can have the next slide, please, Angela. So health and safety law. So as we know, health and safety law and its regulations apply to all businesses, no matter how big, no matter how small. Some, depending on their sector or industry, may have more regulations to comply with than others. So as a business, you should already know what health and safety laws and regulations are relevant to you and what is required under them. I've chosen just 4 to have a look at here in a bit more detail, as I feel that these are going to be the ones that are heavily concentrated on in the getting people back to work as part of this risk assessment process. So first of all, I'm going to talk about the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. We've all seen it. There's a poster normally displayed about stuff. And under this, you have a duty to take all reasonable practical steps to safeguard your employees and non-employees. This, at the moment, will mean that you have to keep up with the latest information that is going on about COVID. I'll move on to the management of health and safety at work regulations. This one requires you to have in place suitable and sufficient risk assessments. So the planning and implementing of all practical risk reduction measures. As I'm sure you already know, if you employ more than 5 people, these all need to be written down. My advice, however, though, is even if you don't employ 5 people, having them recorded will always be worth its while. You may well actually be able to show that and demonstrate that to any customers or clients that may have concerns when you have reopened and got back into business. So by documenting it, you've got it there to show somebody. And you can always refer back to it. Another one of these regulations will be the Personal Protective Equipment Regulations 1992, one that we're hearing a lot about, PPE. This is the one that requires employees to provide suitable PPE. It must be appropriate for the task and the risk and the working conditions. It must be capable of fitting correctly. It must be assessed as being suitable. You need to maintain it, it must be cleaned, and it must be replaced. But more importantly, staff must be trained and given adequate information on the equipment. And at the moment, with these current changes, that may mean needing to update them and train them in these new procedures. They may never have had to wear PPE before, but now this is new to them, so they need training and understanding. The last one I've chosen to have a look at, that I think is relevant to all businesses at the moment, will also be the DSE equipment, display screen equipment regulations. Okay, that doesn't necessarily apply to everybody. If you're a plumber, I don't think it's going to apply to you. But obviously the majority of workplaces, anybody using screens, office environment. So as an employer, you must protect your workers from health and safety risks of working with their display screen equipment. That display screen equipment isn't necessarily just the computer that is sat on the desk. This can also refer to laptops, tablets, and smartphones. Most of these requirements you will be probably covering already in the documents that you have in place and the procedures and the risk assessments you have already carried out. But as the way you work now is going to change, these things must be reviewed as part of this process. Next slide, please, Angela. So the planning stage and the things that we need to consider. You really, as we've already heard today, it's all broken down into 3 categories for me as well. So we need to be looking at the business's needs. So what are those needs? Can stuff still be done remotely? If not, which bits do we need to bring back? Can we still have some people working at home and some people back? What really isn't working to enable us to move the business forward? So Mary's already spoken about some people coming back, some not coming back. So these are the sorts of things that, first of all, you need to plan exactly where your business is and what is working and what isn't. Employee issues. So Mary's spoken a lot about individuals, but also from a health and safety point of view now, not a HR point of view, you will need to look and consider, are there any that are currently being shielded? If we were to return some of our employees to work, at what risk are we putting them at? The reason I've put that one in there as well to consider is because if you were in a shared office environment, is that putting your employees at more risk as more businesses return? So there's lots of things to consider. And environmental issues. So this is the big one that everyone's talking about. When we return, how do we keep social distancing, and what are we going to need to do to put those measures in place? Next slide, please, Angela. So we've spoken about the risk assessment. All risk assessments, in my opinion, should follow and use the risk control hierarchy. Of course, the most effective thing using this chart is to eliminate the hazard completely. But as you will probably already know, that is not always possible, and definitely not possible in this scenario. That would mean if we were to completely eliminate the hazard at the moment, we do not go back to work. The next option is to substituting the hazard. Well, that's actually not possible either, because COVID-19 is something that we literally cannot change. It is here and we can't change it, so there is no substituting it. Engineering controls. So this is like the measures that you're hearing people talk about. This is the desk spacing. This is working with screens. This is working in different ways. This is maybe systems of work, maybe shift patterns, all these sorts of things. These are these lower levels in this hierarchy. You've heard Mary talking about phased returns and having some people. Systems of working could be that you have staggered lunch breaks. So, or it could be that you ask staff to eat at their desks. It's just different ways of working to try and get the business back and get the jobs done. And then PPE is a last resort always, but at the moment this is a priority for most businesses. And you also need to understand that if you have to use PPE, can you do your job effectively using that PPE? Is it going to hinder you in any way? Is it going to cause a problem? Will you still be able to carry out the tasks that you need to carry out? So the risk assessment is the document that it'll be specific, and it will obviously, every risk assessment will be different, and it will depend on your sector, your workforce, and your premises. You will need to think about the demographics and individual vulnerabilities. You will need to also consider the current status of your employees and any of their dependents. Things like the current workstations and the working environment. Can these be changed? Is there space to do that? What about using the lift if you have one in your building? How many people are going to use the lift? Do you need to change the process around the canteen or the kitchen and the toilets? Will you be requiring additional cleaning? And how do your employees get to work? Will they be commuting on public transport? Is that going to be an issue? If you work on a shift pattern or phased return, will you always have enough first aiders and fire marshals? You will still always need to ensure that your fire alarms and equipment are tested, even if you don't have all of your staff back. And then not forgetting home workers. There are more and more of us working from home. It could be that some of your staff stay working at home. So this will become a longer term arrangement. Is the facility that they have suitable and safe? Are they able to carry on working from home longer term? And you will then need to look at things like the DSE assessments, not only for maybe the people working from home, but consider that if you have had to rearrange your workstations and your office environment to include the social distancing, that's a whole new work setup for them, and that leads to a new DSE assessment. So I mentioned that I would give you some suggestions and ideas. Next slide, please, Angela.
I got carried away.
Sorry. So we've already just spoken there a little bit. Each risk assessment, you will need to consider some options. So if you're familiar with the risk assessment process, you need to list what the risk is, what the issue is going to hazard and what it's going to cause you. You then need to list what measures you currently have in place, and then also look at what new measures you can put in place. So there should be a series of boxes across, and obviously the risk is always the likelihood times the severity, and that's, you are trying to get that number down. So each area of your risk assessment, you will need to consider these options. Here are just a few suggestions that we have been talking about and what other people have been talking about. So you've got some really simple things up here on the screen. I won't talk through those ones. I'll give you some other ones, but they're there for you to have a look at. But, you know, I've already mentioned about staff not using the kitchen, the microwave, the canteen facility maybe. So bring their own food, eat at their own desk maybe. Maybe you go out and sit in their car to eat, or even go and sit outside in a bit of fresh air where they can, and have them, so that they are not all congregating in one place, or maybe that's how you're used to be. Stagger the lunch times. It avoids them working together. There's just an example of that recently. One of my clients needed to return to work on a construction site. They're very used to all having the same lunch breaks and the same canteens. And we just rewrote their risk assessment to say they had to bring their own food and they had to walk away to a safe area and eat alone. And it worked. It was a small change, but it worked. I mentioned lifts. So if lifts are in place, work out safely the numbers who can use that lift at any one time. Work out the capacity maybe of really large meeting rooms or breakout areas that you have. Work out safely how many people can sit within these areas. And then a simple thing to do would be to remove the chairs that you aren't going to use so that they can't be overused, so people can see exactly how much space and who can sit where. Consider disposable towels for any kitchen areas or toilet areas. Just a little simple change. And obviously, Kate mentioned earlier, but there's a pretty good chance that you're going to have to somehow increase your cleaning schedules. And how is that going to work? What time are your cleaners going to come in? If you don't have cleaners, who's going to pick up that responsibility? And one of the last suggestions that I would put onto here would be ensure that first aiders know how to manage a suspected case of COVID-19 as per the government's advice. So your staff return to work, somebody's taken ill in the workplace and doesn't feel very well. Do your first aiders know the correct procedures and what they need to do? Next slide, please. So in summary, this is going to be the start of a much longer process, and we will need careful monitoring and updates. We've all been talking about communication. Communication with employees is absolutely key to any return to work, both from a HR point of view, from a leadership point of view, but also from a health and safety point of view. Communication with the employees will ensure that the safety of your employees, clients, and customers. Communication with your clients is also really key. If your process has changed and you used to have visitors come into your premises on a regular basis, maybe that needs to be changed because of your new system, your new arrangements. But you need to let your customers and your clients know of what that change is so that they can be prepared. Things to look out for. So I'm going to go back to very poor documentation and not having these documented risk assessments in place. The HSE have already said that they will investigate any concerns raised by employees. Mary's already picked up a lot on anxiety, and I'm getting calls about it as well. People are worried if they go back to work, what measures have been put in place? How do I know it's safe? This risk assessment is going to prove that and assist with that conversation that you need to have. I think it would also be great to do a questionnaire or getting your staff's feedback before they come back about what their concerns are, what they feel about certain measures. And I'm also a big believer that when you come to write a risk assessment, sometimes the best people to ask are the people that do the job, because if they can assist you with suggestions and ideas, the chances of the system working better, it speaks for itself. I could sit there and write a risk assessment for somebody doing a job, and don't get me wrong, I do them. But actually, you then take that and deliver it, but that's not actually the way that the guy does it. Or it just, if you can get their involvement, talk to them, communicate with them, especially if you're going to have to introduce PPE, because PPE for them it's going to be the first time they've had to wear it. So let's ask them about it. Let's talk to them about it. How does it need to work for them? You know, are they going to get hot? Are they going to need to swap their gloves out so many times a day? Do they need stronger kind of gloves to last a bit longer because of the task that they're doing? If they're in an office environment, who's going to wipe desks down? How are we going to open door handles? All those sorts of things need to be communicated with them in detail. As I said, the HSE, they will react, and if an employee is unsure about something, has concerns, they will pick up the phone to the HSE and say, I'm really not very happy about going back to work. The HSE will investigate that. They have already said they will do that. And they will still be carrying out inspections to ensure that suitable and sufficient measures have been put in place. So we've spoken about a few things there. Signage. If you are changing your processes, clear signage, arrows, one-way routes, instructions maybe for your staff, your visitors, for whoever. We've all seen it in the shops where we've been going recently. You know, you've got the arrows, you've got the signage about social distancing. That you're going to have to do the same thing depending on how many staff you've got and what measures you put in place. Great advice is being made available from both professional and trade bodies at the moment. It's out there, it's on the internet, it's readily available. Use it. There is so much good information being shared around at the moment, but also the HSE website and the government site are providing so much information. The government has got individual booklets that you can download, going into different sectors, returning to construction, returning to the office, returning to shops, all these businesses, they have produced leaflets and information, and they are really very detailed and very useful. They even have like checklists within those documents that you can easily work your way through. Next slide, please, Angela. So I hope that I've managed to condense the most important things at the moment from a health and safety point of view in getting yourselves and your teams back to work in a safe manner. Have you got any questions?
Thanks ever so much, Lucy. That's a really concise but fantastic overview of what we've got to do. I guess it all does start with the risk assessment. So if you don't have a risk assessment in place, what should we be doing?
Oh, okay. A little bit worrying personally if you haven't got your risk assessments in place, but it's never too late. They should really be in place for what you currently do. And there are so many free templates to download and information available. If you don't have them for the tasks that you have been doing in the past, at the moment I would focus purely on one to get you back to work. So look at what you do and document it and get that first risk assessment in place. You need to look at the measures, you need to look at what you need to put in place. Health and safety, it really does not need to be complicated or long-winded, and sometimes the most simple of documents and the most simple of an assessment is all that is required. But of course that does depend on each business. Some businesses are very detailed, very complicated, whereas others can be very, very simple. Get that first risk assessment drawn up, download some templates, or by all means speak to myself for some advice. And once you have that one in place, if you don't have any others, you need to be looking towards putting other documents in place.
Fantastic. Okay, and somebody sort of said, is it expensive to get a risk assessment? I guess that depends.
It really will depend, yeah, on the size of the business and the kind of work that you do. I am offering 30 minutes free advice to guide and advise anybody that has attended the webinars, to guide them and point them in the right direction first, to see what they have, what's required, and what they may need moving forward.
Thank you, that's really generous. And the HSC, what are they up to? Are there going to be lots of fines for this? I guess it's too early to have any history, but do we know what they're going to be doing?
Yeah, well, I suppose as we're moving into this new phase of supporting this safe return to work across Great Britain, the HSC is adjusting the focus of its activities. It will still be including the visits to the premises and sites, which will be conducted in line with social distancing regulations and guidelines. But they are stipulating very heavily that duty holders continue to have obligations to comply with health and safety at work, no matter what. You have to manage and control the workplace risks, which is obviously what I've been focusing on, including the protection of workers and others from COVID-19 in the workplace. So they will still be active, and yes, who knows? Personally, I think they're there to offer some very good support and guidance, and if they do turn up, I think they will be very supportive if you're putting measures in place, but they will return.
Thank you very much. That's wonderful. Okay, so now we are moving over to speak with John. John is one of our favourite nerds. He's got an unusual ability to explain complicated technology in terms even a Luddite like me can understand. He runs Octopus Computers, which is an IT managed service provider supporting business and schools with all their IT needs. John also owns and operates a number of other technology businesses, making him a font of knowledge for all things nerdy. John.
Thank you very much for that flattering introduction. So I'm going to give a rough overview following the same guides that everyone else has done. I really want to try and take a bit of a technology angle on all of the topics, but keep it on theme. One thing that's going to be very difficult is giving specific tool examples. So specific applications or software requirements are quite hard to actually go through. A lot of these things should be used as finding the right fit for your organization, rather than relying on, I always use the example, but my mate Dave in a shed used Zoom. I heard it was good, so we should as well. Zoom's great, by the way, but there are also lots of other alternatives, and that's often true when it comes to CRMs, marketing, productivity, collaboration, all these different functions and facets. So it's important to have somebody, ideally yourself, who has an overview of the processes and requirements within your business before you really try and delve into a specific tool. But if anybody has specific questions at the end, we can try and go through those. I know most applications in some broad sense. So leaping sort of straight into it from a planning perspective, I've got brilliant slides, really descriptive, so you have to listen to me. What I wanted to go through from a planning side is something which is, in my experience, often, if not always, overlooked, and that's IT strategy or strategy documentation. So I would love to say that it simply needs updating, but in many cases it will need creating. Your IT strategy should really dictate how your company is going to use technology, how it's going to be deployed if it's not already present, and what your plans are across the coming months and years. It should have key areas in it, such as continuity, compliance, security, disaster recovery, applications, as well as reporting on metrics, some staffing needs, access requirements, and a bit of a roadmap if applicable. And there's a lot there to process, and there's a lot to go through. I don't want to spend 20 minutes talking to you about IT strategy documentation. So on a really top level, the strategy here should be linked to the overall business strategy. So if the business plans to grow or scale, how is the IT strategy going to support that? How will your company's IT infrastructure scale with you? Likewise, if you plan to consolidate, shrink as some people do, or keep as same, how are you actually going to make sure that your infrastructure will keep up? Ultimately, in IT, I'm very fortunate in a sense that the service I provide actually breaks over time and I have to be paid to fix it. But businesses often overlook that fact. Technology does fail and you need a plan to deal with it. The other thing to address is that strategy is not a tactic. It's not a quick fix. A strategy has to involve a longer term vision. It's got to be adaptive and it's got to be reviewed regularly. So when you're coming up with your plan, you should really be looking at what I would call standardization. So if this, then that flowcharts. If this happens, it's a trigger for us to kick off this event. If this happens, we need to address and review this security plan. And that sort of standardization is going to help. And you should also have an onboarding and offboarding plan. So when a new employee comes, we go through the following steps to make sure they are compliant and initiated into the company in the right way. That's not like a hazing in a frat house. It's more, have they got the right device, the security, have they been trained on the device? Are they going to get the best use of the tools we have? Have they been trained on our processes? That sort of approach. And offboarding is just as important. It's quite often for people to come to me when they start their self-employed journey saying, I've got this computer from my old job. From an IT security perspective, that's a horrible position to be in. You should not have ex-employees wandering around with your devices. Things need to be wiped and offboarded appropriately. It's also worth looking at, I would say now more than ever, remote working, cloud technologies, and the efficiency within your business. I'm a massive advocate of driving efficiency through the use of technologies, and I think now is really the way to embrace that change. I'll go into how we can do this a bit later on, but it starts with really looking at your existing process maps. I know some brilliant action coaches who could help you with that. But starting with those process maps and then understanding which elements of it are repeat and could be automated. And that will fall into most aspects of a business, whether it's administration, client communication, marketing, the actual process itself, your operations side. There's always elements which can be streamlined. And when you're looking to save cost in difficult times, a lot of people, I feel, should be looking to invest in automation and efficiency. But you really need a rough plan to cover all of these, and that's strategization as well. So that's my brief take on planning. Going on to the next one, when we talk of leadership, much as Rupert said, leadership is very important, and now more than ever, people will be looking to their leaders. Something I often come up against, one of my favorite quotes is the only one on the screen, and that's that we should do our management side of things through data. We should make data-led decisions. But when it comes to leadership, that's a much softer skill. It's very much people-led. So treat your management through data, treat your management through the facts and the figures you get, treat your leadership through your staff, your culture, your people. One of the important things to me is to make sure that you're leading by example, especially in IT leadership. Too often change isn't driven from the top. It comes from maybe a younger employee, maybe an operational employee, a new acquisition who knows things could be better. And they drive the change. And what happens is you'll see sometimes that the management or some of the leadership team will actually push against it, start saying negative things, be it behind closed doors, but it still happens. And that has a really negative and damning effect on how change is implemented throughout the business. So it's really important as a leader that you don't lament the challenges, you don't complain about where you are, you don't complain about the new software. You need to understand why it's being implemented, the benefit, and you need to champion why it's important. You need to make sure that as the leader within IT or within the organization, certainly, you're demonstrating the use of technologies when they are deployed and that you are championing them. Technology should provide businesses with much greater and deeper data for reporting. So that should really help you build your management picture. It shouldn't be something where you're struggling with. All software, almost to the penny actually, is built around a database reporting function. So even if you're using Microsoft Teams or Microsoft Word even nowadays, you can actually report on how it's being used and how that's being used within your organization. And that should form some of your leadership conversations. If, say, for example, you use Office 365 or Google Suite of Apps, both of them now have well-being functionality. So you're able as a leader to look into how your employees are actually working in and out of hours, how they are collaborating, how they're communicating. These are all metrics that you can look on and then communicate appropriately with them. And it is communication. I think that's really important. Leadership is about how we communicate and how we react or don't to the data that you're going to gather. It's very easy to ignore it or be quite happy with the fact that people are working out of hours. But as the others have touched on, it's certainly not my area of expertise, but with staff anxiety and concerns, you need to be very aware of how people are operating as well as how they feel. And the two should paint a blended picture. And finally, from a leadership side, I do believe it's important that you become what I would call an enabler for your staff. That's very much from an IT perspective. So do make sure that your employees have all of the tools they need to do their job comfortably and well. And that is soft and hard tools, as I would call them. So I'm not just talking about a physical computer, a laptop and a phone. Do they have the connectivity, the broadband, phone, the applications to do telephony, connectivity, all these sorts of things, especially if you're doing a remote or work from home. You've really got to make sure that your staff are using the tools you've provided to the best and that they are comfortable doing so. As a leader, it's your job to make sure that change is managed the correct way. We'll come on to change shortly. But yeah, it's my take on leadership. I do think from an IT leadership side, it's quite difficult sometimes because things go wrong so often. IT, by its very nature, breaks and adapts. One of the biggest problems is that IT is always pushing forward, sometimes when industries and standards aren't. So you end up with perhaps younger or different employees joining. I use younger as an example. It's often not the case, actually, but people coming into a business who have seen things done a different way and believe that they know best. You'll know this if you've moved between different jobs or if you've seen different places. Everyone always has a different way of working, even down to you could use the same tool in multiple different ways. So you've really got to make sure as a leader that you're demonstrating how you want people to use the tools you have, how people are going to implement it, and that they're trained to follow your IT processes. Going on to the next one, which is maximum effort. This does tie in an awful lot. It's always difficult to challenge our own beliefs and processes. Certainly from an IT perspective, it's very important that we put a lot of effort into change. Change isn't easy, change goes wrong, things break. But with IT, what's nice is that when the change fails for whatever reason, it is rarely catastrophic. And that may feel hard to believe, but it really isn't. If you have an IT professional who knows what they're doing, or even somebody in-house who can do the same, often things can just be learned from and improved on for next time. All IT should be treated iteratively across a road of continuous improvement, not something which is very hard and rigid. Let's also say from an effort perspective that you really push into efficiency and you drill down quite hard into your processes within the business, and that you do scrutinize every element of it. Take a sort of a manufacturing approach to your process, even if you're in a service industry or something else, or hospitality. There is always a process map there, and it can always be drilled into. It just hurts sometimes, but you need to do it. You need to accept sometimes that things aren't done the right way. But on the flip side of that, though, do avoid change for change's sake. What you're looking for is a smoother, and in my mind, automated environment as much as possible, but not shaking things up because you get bored. Sometimes things are as good as they will be, certainly in whatever setting you're working in. You might be waiting on a different tool, sometimes a different approach, or a different mindset to do something. Timing is important. And change management, when it's done effectively, actually increases return on investment when you make change. It's a bit of a mouthful, but what it means is that if you just make a change and say, that's it, from tomorrow we're changing all of our software, it will happen. And if there are benefits to be made there over time, they will be felt. But if your change is linked to efficiency, revenue, or return, you really want to make sure you have a change management plan. And that takes effort, it takes management style, it takes leadership, and it takes great communication, all things which we've covered. Depending on your organization size, you might want to consider what we would call an early adopter program. So that's roughly 5 to 10% of headcount, having, say, a first approach to it, and then phase changes and testing later on. It's also important when things go wrong to understand why, to in my mind, celebrate failure and use them as a learning experience. It's always better if things are going to fail that it happens at the start of a process. So you want to really be encouraging people to push things to break. You want to be finding every fault that you can when you're making a change, leaning into it and pushing for that to happen, because You want to be finding those out at the start as a leader with your early adopters, rather than when you've got the entire organization in full flow for 6 months and then realize that something's gone catastrophically wrong. You really want to be pushing to break it early. Make sure obviously you learn from those errors, course correct wherever possible, and just be aware of the fact that it takes a lot of effort and energy to do these things. It takes a lot of resilience and a solid mindset to know we've pushed for change and it's gone wrong, but we have to keep going with it. We've pushed for this thing, it's broken. Okay, how do we get back up? It's particularly important if you're developing your own software, but even if you're deploying a different tool, it's something you've got to be focused on. The rewards are worth it. I can't emphasize that enough. As scary as change is, certainly if it's a digital transformation, it's massively going to affect the way you work. Now, I can come into some case studies if people want. Going on to how you would communicate that and the communication style. A quote I hear a lot is, "This meeting could have been an email." It's a bit of a bugbear if that's not apparent. I think the clean and concise communication is very important, and too often people like to have a meeting for meeting's sake. The question, I suppose, posed to me is how technology could play a role in that, and how we could use technology to perhaps minimize inefficient communication. So video meetings are fantastic, but having unnecessary video meetings with an entire team can be a bit of a time sink. So when we first entered lockdown, a lot of my team on the technician side, they wanted to have a daily video meeting with all of them. Which I thought was a great idea, and I still think it is. We still do them. But when it first started, it was very much a social interaction, getting all of that water cooler culture out. So the end of their day was sometimes 45 minutes to an hour of unfocused chat, just because it was nice to see each other. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but keeping that focused, keeping it timely, has really trimmed back the way they work. So now it's a very focused, go through each person, give this what we call a what went well and even better if. So how did your day go? How could it have been improved? And move on to the next person. It's still communication, it's still constant, and it's still a regular activity. People aren't feeling disconnected and isolated, but it's much more focused. So having an agenda for these things is really important. I would say moving virtual is a great way to remove what could have been an email meetings. Certainly when they are so easy to quickly dial into, Teams, Hangout, Zoom, WebEx, whatever it is you're using, it's very easy to embrace that technology and start using it. So it's a good way to remove those accidental meetings which happen when you're in an office environment. And I see no reason that we shouldn't take that and carry it through when we do reopen. But quick conversations with colleagues should also be embraced through technology. Certainly something we do is we will quickly dial up a video chat with someone. I still feel you need body language, you need cues, you need to be able to see the people that you're communicating with to understand what's going on. So do have those video chats with people. It does save complicated back and forth email exchanges. We've all seen them of do we, don't we, 6 or 7 times between a whole group of people all weighing in. And that's really a great trigger for a call or a collaborative chat. Also be aware of, speaking of collaborative chat, those sorts of tools, Slack, Trello, Asana, great applications like that, which allow threaded conversation and a bit of a board approach or Kanban boarding to your conversations and projects. You don't want it to feel slapdash. You've got to make sure that people are communicating. For me, the benefit for many companies in an office is that shared experience, that collaboration element. And it comes through, to me, what I would call collective awareness. When you're in an office environment and you're all around the desk, everyone seems to know what everyone else is doing, certainly far more so than we have in the last 50 days. But you can use technology to achieve the same thing. You just need to make sure you've got the tools there. As long as people are documenting their work, recording what they're doing, and seeking help where it's needed. And again, the little daily meetings I addressed there can do it. It creates this sort of audit trail and this collective awareness, which is important to the business. It's important that you all feel a team and that you all know what each one of you is driving on. So do lean into the digital communication tools which are there. And if you're struggling with it, ask questions, reach out to me at the end, or Angela and Rupert, and find out how you can perhaps deploy them within your business. They're relatively simple, and there are some great free options as well. Going into something a little bit more bleak and difficult to understand is compliance. I honestly will never have enough time to talk about cyber compliance on a single day's talk. There is so much to delve into here. I suppose from a top level perspective, what I want people to be aware of is that within IT, a lot of people accept that the biggest vulnerability or point of failure is always going to be people. It's always going to be those users who are actually using your technology, not the computer itself which will fail, it's how the person is using it. That's even more important when, as a business, you don't have hands or eyes on the device they're using. In most organizations, certainly from what I've seen, most cases of data loss, encryption, theft, ransomware, hacking, all the malicious things you hear about all the time, it honestly just comes from a lack of scrutiny or even an unlocked or unsecured device. Really basic steps can eliminate 80 to 90% of the risks that people face. So having a sort of policy, going back to your IT planning and documents, having a policy along the lines of how often do we review password security. That's not to say that we enforce password resets, that's been proven to be less secure, but are we ensuring and auditing, say, password length and complexity? And that can be done in the background without sharing passwords. Are we making sure that we are remaining compliant? We've got GDPR standards, ISO standards, that's on a very broad level, as well as are you being compliant with your specific sector? So FCA if you're in finance, SRA if you're in legal, ASA standards, TSI standards, TSO standards. It all depends on the sector you're working in, but you're going to have specific legislative requirements you have to meet from an IT side. Really important you get those checked over for an IT professional, that they are confirming you're compliant. This comes down to where you're storing data, how you're how you're viewing the data, how you're accessing your data, and how you're going through everything you're working on. So do make sure that's done, and also look at some real basic tools. If you're using Windows, Windows 10 Professional includes free encryption, and it will encrypt your device. That way, if you lose it, you don't have to report it to the Information Commission's officer. Likewise, on a Mac, you can turn on encryption. Once it's encrypted, if you lose your device, there's no data loss. It's impossible to breach. It's the same with the Windows approach. With the right tools, you don't expose yourself, and that's what I really want people to know. It's also important to make sure your staff are engaged with training. You want really suspicious staff members from an IT perspective. You want cynics, and you want people to be alert and on the lookout for anything which is too good to be true. There is no such thing as a free meal, no matter what you've been emailed. Unlikely, there is no such thing as free money. There's no Nigerian prince who's looking to shift off all of his millions of pounds. And also, they do not have webcam footage of you. So these are the common things that you need people to be very suspicious of, because the moment you engage with these fraudsters, you're going to go down a very slippery path, and ultimately you're going to lose. So just a little bit of broad training, and also communicate with your team. Anytime they do see something, flag it with their colleagues. Talk about the scams that you're seeing, because a lot of this social engineering is the true way businesses fail. You need to make sure everyone's communicating and is checking what's going on. And two-factor as well. So two-factor authentication. That isn't just in terms of when you log in, you also get a text to make sure it's the right password. But also if you get a request to transfer funds, check it. Check it that it's come from internally, check it with that person in a second method, and check it with the client as well if they've requested payment. It's never going to hurt. It's only going to make you look good with a bit of due diligence, but it could save you thousands. And I know so many businesses that have lost tens of thousands at best due to basic things like failing to check. The final thing I want to draw attention to is that cyber criminals at the moment really are exploiting the fact that users are isolated. They really are using what's known as social engineering or spear phishing attacks to really pick on people's isolation. And they also know that people are using perhaps what's known as a blended device within IT. So not necessarily a corporate compliant device. Maybe they're using their iPad because they're working from home, or, well, actually, I normally use this, but I'll use my home computer because it's already set up in the office. These are massive security risks that need addressing, and they're so simple to go through as well. So a little audit of how your users are working and what they're using just really keeps compliance at the forefront. And finally, just want to go through what I would call sort of test and measure. So that's, again, using technology from an automation and reporting perspective. You've got to be using, like I said at the start, the technology and look at the data that you've got throughout the business. This isn't just what you might get through cloud accountancy or any accountancy like P&L and financial metrics, but also the soft metrics that I touched on. Data, though, I would say is only of any use if you actually act on it. I know so many people who become data obsessed because when you get big tools and big technology, there's a lot of data you can get to. There's a lot of things you can report on. But the reality is, if you're not going to act or assess what the data is telling you, there's no point. Taking a marketing example, if you use your Google Analytics, it's a very common tool that most people have access to. If you want to delve into, say, your gender split or your affluence split of people going to your website, unless you're going to act on the fact that, say, 70% of your web traffic is female, not male, there's no point even worrying about the data. It's kind of just an interesting point that should be immediately skipped over. There are ways to act on things like that. For example, focusing your language or the way you display data in a different way. But unless you're going to take those steps, there's no point reporting on it, and there's no point even assessing it. So when you are collecting data, focus on the sort of data you actually want. But then when you do have it, focus on the tools, which I'm sure Luke and Angela will go through, but also things like tools such as PDCA, which is Plan, Do, Check, Act. Go through your 7 wastes, apply proper operational efficiency with that data, and try and trim down wherever possible. All these things are there, and it's just a case of knowing you have access to it. You can report on that database. Once you've got the data, communicate with the team and collaborate with solutions if you find problems. Ultimately, your data, to me, should serve as your canary down the mine. Anything that you're able to test on, if you roll something out, if you implement a new process, if you test a new marketing strategy, a sales strategy, you should have data on the back of that. You can then assess how it's gone, just adjust, just constantly course correct until you're on the right path. So yeah, technology is there really to deliver a data-driven decision, but it can also help with some of the soft skills as well. So, real quick overview there from a test and measure perspective. And that's it from me. I've probably ranted and rambled at an extremely fast pace for long enough. But if you've got any questions or anything, please let me know.
Thank you so much for that, John. Really, really useful just to put it in context. When we talk about, sometimes when we talk about technology, we were all just like, should we use this or should we use that? So it's really great to see that the first thing that we have to do is to make a plan. As always, make a plan. You mentioned fraud. Are you seeing a lot of fraud? Because from a email, and I know that HMRC is seeing a lot of fraud, and the banks are seeing a lot of fraud going on.
We are. In particular, it's this what I discussed as spear phishing. These are attacks where someone would impersonate your colleague. So this was common when people were in the office sat next to each other, but it's having even more of an impact now people are remote. So that's where you get an email as the accountant or as payroll supervisor from, say, the MD, and I'm using air quotes here, impersonating him, saying, and the email would open with something like, what's the charge for same-day transfers? They're very innocuous, not asking for you to transfer funds. And once you've replied, they've really got you. She said, we don't have that cost. We can just make a bank transfer same day. The reply would then come of, brilliant, please transfer £6,500 to this bank with this reference number. So you've really fallen for the spear phishing attempt because they approached it in such this soft touch way. And it's those sorts of attacks which work. They work pre-lockdown, but when people aren't together, it's even more prevalent, and it's having such an impact. So yeah, one to really watch out for.
Wonderful, thank you. I guess there's so much detail here. I don't think we'll go on it, but if anybody does want to speak to John about any tools, then I'm sure he'll be happy to talk to you. There, as I say, one of the big problems is there's just so many choices out there. So if you are looking to change, you can quite often be faced with an analysis paralysis almost, so that you just don't move on because you can't find the right one. So going right back and having a plan and having a strategy would be a great way of making sure that doesn't happen. I loved the idea of pushing it to break, certainly when you're testing it. That's really, really very, very useful. Thank you very much.
Very welcome.
So we've spoken to all our experts now. I think from all of them, the message is make a plan, look at all the areas that you need to look at, and make a plan. The benefit of a plan is not necessarily in the bit of paper that you're going to get, but the value in the plan is in the thinking. So think about how you're going to return to work. What areas do you need to consider? What do you need to do with your team and your operations departments? with your HR, your technology, how much money do you need to have for all of those areas? And again, just to make sure that we do make the most of this time, getting back in a safe way. As somebody mentioned earlier, we are likely to be having this situation for a long time. So it is now time to act, and we do need to move on. So when you're looking at making a plan, perhaps just write something for each of these areas that we've talked about. Just put down one action that you're going to do today, or not today, but maybe next week, because it's nearly time for the weekend. So just look at all of your areas of your business and say, what do I need to do in terms of my team? What do I need to do in terms of health and safety, in terms of HR with the staff, and in terms of my technology, does that need to change? And write down something there. Just a very quick, brief overview of what Action Coach offers. We offer a coaching program for everybody. We believe that all business owners can benefit from coaching on some level, and the workshops and the webinars that we're giving out at the moment, which are currently free, is the starter for the coaching, and we work all the way up to coaching teams, senior leadership teams. And if anybody wants to have more details of that, the best thing they can do is to book in either to a 2-hour strategy session with Rupert or myself, or have a virtual coffee call, or both with us. The links are on the screen now. We would recommend you book into our marketing masterclass on the 21st of May. And if you have learnt a lot from this masterclass that we've been putting on today, could you recommend a friend and join us again next Friday, when we'll be going through it all again at 2 o'clock. I will be putting all the links that people have mentioned in an email that will come out to you to gauge your interest, and for us to get some feedback. So if you do need those links, they will be in the email. That's it from us. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. And we will see you hopefully very soon on a computer in your living room. Thanks very much. Goodbye.
Okay, we can talk now.
Yay.
Hey.
Hello, are we still recording?
Oh, we probably are, yes, and no bad language. Angela, stop the recording.
You're now live on channel 4. Please do not swear.